Philosophers have discussed ethics for over 2 millennia. In this video, I begin to explain those discussions. First, I will explain what is meant by ethics and morals, and then I will continue on to descriptive, prescriptive, and applied ethics. My name is Jouni Vilkka, and this video is part of my series of video lectures titled Introduction to Philosophy and Critical Thinking. See the link in the description for more information about that. In this series, I am following the Finnish national curriculum for the Introduction to Philosophy course. It is the first of 2 mandatory courses on philosophy in Finland, the second being a course on ethics. That second course was only recently made mandatory for all as well, when a similar course was removed from religious education courses. Because ethics now has a dedicated mandatory course, it is no longer usually covered during the first course on philosophy. But because this is my introduction to philosophy and critical thinking, and I am making this for what I hope to be wider audiences than students at Finnish senior high schools, I want to include a short introduction to ethics here as well. After all, ethics is a very important part of philosophy. For many, it is clearly the most important part. Because ethics is also strongly connected to social philosophy, I will include some of that here as well. My main sources for this section are Filosofian ydin by Antti Mattila and Seppo Nysönen and Filosofian haasteet by Jari Keinonen and Tere Wadén. First, the terms ethics and morals. I find it annoying to hear so often people mention these terms as a mantra, ethics and morals. In a way, that makes me wonder if those people actually mean anything by them. It could be that they think it is just one thing, and for some reason it requires 3 words, ethics and morals. Or it could be that they actually do mean 2 different things, both of which are relevant to what they are talking about, ethics and morals. Historically, the meaning of the 2 words was originally the same. The root of the word ethics is just in Greek, while morals comes from Latin. Mors majorum in Latin means the way or tradition of the ancestors. The plural form of the word is mores, which is where morals comes from. Ethics and morals both originally refer to proper conduct, as seen by ancient Greeks and Romans to be how their ancestors allegedly had behaved, or their idealized behavior, which was to be emulated. These ancient ideals were at least partly different from what we would think of as good behavior now. Ancient peoples were very traditional and conservative, while modern people tend to be able to think for themselves more and choose lifestyles that suit their personalities better than what might be handed down to them as the right way one ought to live. Of course, there are still many different cultural norms around the world, despite increased globalism. There are also several different philosophical views, of course, about such things. What is important is the idea that we have responsibilities, duties, and we can act in ways that can be seen as the right or wrong ways to behave. Different cultures and individual philosophers have had different views about these things. To analyze the discussion, we need to define some concepts. By ethics, I will refer to what has also been, confusingly, called moral philosophy. Within the whole of philosophy, it belongs in the branch of practical philosophy, as does social philosophy. Ethics deals with such concepts and subjects as justice, inequality, right and wrong, good and evil, the good life, and so on. Philosophical ethics differs, for example, from religious morals by demanding rational justification for the claims made, not accepting such things as revelations or holy scriptures as the basis for moral claims. The term morals, on the other hand, I typically use in the sense of social norms or rules, what, for example, children are taught in fairy tales, as expressed in the phrase, the moral of the story. This is typically not a philosophical way of discussing the subject. For example, moralism is often used as a way to attempt to exert power over others by appealing to generally accepted morals or accusing someone of behaving immorally, contrary to those morals. Often the moralizing people themselves are guilty of hypocrisy, pretending to be moral or more moral than they in fact are. They may even be doing the very things they are preaching against. If caught, they might exclaim, "Do as I say, not as I do." Such double standards are generally frowned upon because they reek of disingenuity. If the person truly opposed the behavior, why would they do it anyway? Philosophers have noted the problem of weakness of will and recognize that a person may indeed be able to act against their better judgment. So if I tell you to avoid drinking too much alcohol, but then imbibe too much myself, it may be because of the weakness of my will. You may accuse me of hypocrisy, but I am only being dishonest if I claim to not drink myself. To avoid any wrongdoing, I can admit to my own failing and advise you to not make the same mistake I made. Surely that is not hypocrisy. Morals, for example social norms, can be critically analyzed by philosophers, but it is also what philosophers can devise for themselves. If it is the product of philosophical thinking, it can be called an ethical theory or an ethical life stance. A set of rules that one has uncritically adopted, I will only call morals. Unfortunately, the terminology here is a bit confusing, and the word moral is used also in a philosophical context. There is a field of study called descriptive ethics. It is the empirical study of moral behavior and opinions. Because of its empirical nature, it is not really philosophy. It belongs to cultural studies, social science, psychology, and possibly other fields like that. The purpose of this line of inquiry is to find out how people think about morality and how they actually behave. Their behavior may be different from their professed opinions and beliefs, and they may even be unaware of the contradictions between their alleged beliefs and actual behavior. This may be of interest to philosophers, but as it is not itself part of philosophy proper, I will say no more of it here. The kind of philosophy where one is trying to create rules about correct behavior is called prescriptive or normative ethics. General rules of behavior are called norms, and a philosopher may prescribe them for society in an attempt to improve said society. This is closely connected to social philosophy, but the difference is in that in normative ethics, the norms are intended for individuals themselves to apply in their own lives, while social philosophy is interested in figuring out how whole societies should function and what makes a good society. How a state or the economic system should be organized, for example. There are different kinds of norms with different kinds of sanctions for breaking them. Breaking legal norms will result in legal sanctions, such as fines or imprisonment. Breaking moral norms that are not also legal norms may be frowned upon, so how morally you behave may be reflected in your social standing. A known liar will not be trusted or liked, for example, while everyone will praise a helpful person or a philanthropist. I hope. Besides prescribing ethics for the whole world, a philosopher may also seek a specific way of life for themselves, which would be referred to as a philosophy of life. That is also part of ethics. You can think of it as prescribing a way of life for yourself. Everyone will adopt a life stance of some kind, but a thinking person tries to do so intentionally by making rational, justified decisions and choices. It has been thought that otherwise one is simply adrift, pushed by random currents, not really taking action and controlling themselves and their own life. Taking responsibility for one's own life and choices requires thinking about ethics. Philosophical answers to practical ethical questions or specific situations is called applied ethics. For example, physicians have ethical codes of conduct to guide them, but the general code can sometimes be difficult to apply in a real-life situation. A general norm in medicine could require the physician to preserve life, but in some situations that could mean continuing and even increasing suffering. It might then be thought merciful to end the suffering by ending the life, to allow a good death, euthanasia. It could involve the physician in an assisting role only, or a more active one, which again brings up further important questions. Some will even argue that a patient has the right to die with dignity, demanding the physician to kill the patient. But that could be very traumatic to the physician themselves. I hope you can see how this can easily lead to conflicts between different norms. Applied ethics is about trying to give an answer to a specific case, much like a legal precedent used in a court of law. An acceptable solution can afterwards be applied without having to go through the whole discussion again every single time a similar case comes up. I have now explained some basic concepts about ethics. Next time I will talk about the analysis of different ethical theories, or meta-ethics. Bye for now. If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.